Imagine a man handed 75 years behind bars, a sentence meant to outlast his very life. This isn't a story of a violent cartel leader or a street criminal, but of a high-ranking official trusted with the nation's survival. Saleh Mamman, Nigeria's former Minister of Power, once held the keys to illuminating 36 states. Today, those keys have turned against him, locking him away for a staggering duration. How did a dream of national electrification turn into a nightmare of systemic theft? Born in the rolling hills of Taraba State, Saleh Mamman rose through the ranks of civil service to reach the pinnacle of Nigerian political power. In 2019, President Muhammadu Buhari appointed him to lead the Ministry of Power, a portfolio burdened with the hopes of millions. For a country plagued by perpetual blackouts, Mamman was seen as the technocrat who would finally fix the grid. But behind the polished suits and official portraits, a massive web of financial deception was already being spun. The centerpiece of Mamman's tenure was the ambitious Zungeru and Mambilla hydroelectric projects. These were not just engineering feats, they were symbols of Nigerian progress, promised to add thousands of megawatts to the struggling national grid. Billions of naira were funneled into these initiatives, funded by international loans and taxpayer money. The world watched as Nigeria claimed it was finally on the path to energy self-sufficiency. However, while the project stalled on the ground, the money began to vanish into private accounts. The Mambilla project was supposed to be Africa's largest power station, located in the remote heights of Taraba. It required massive logistics, international cooperation, and, most importantly, transparent leadership. Yet, investigators soon discovered that contracts were being manipulated and funds diverted before a single stone was laid. As the minister, Mamman was the custodian of these resources, but the EFCC alleged he turned the ministry into a personal gold mine, orchestrating a fraud that would eventually lead to his spectacular downfall. By 2021, the whispers of financial impropriety grew into a roar that the presidency could no longer ignore. President Buhari, who had campaigned on a platform of anti-corruption, took the decisive step of relieving Mamman of his duties. It was a rare move that signaled the gravity of the situation. As he left his office for the final time, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, or EFCC, was already waiting in the shadows with a mountain of evidence. The investigation was a masterclass in forensic accounting. Agents tracked billions of naira moving through a labyrinth of shell companies and personal bank accounts. They found that Mamman had allegedly colluded with high-ranking staff in the ministry to siphon funds meant for the Zungeru project. The scale was staggering. The money stolen could have provided electricity to thousands of hospitals and schools across the country. The EFCC moved quickly, freezing assets and preparing for a high-stakes legal battle. Money laundering is the art of making dirty money look clean, but Mamman's tracks were not as hidden as he believed. The prosecution revealed how hundreds of millions were transferred under the guise of consultancy fees and administrative costs. These funds were then used to acquire luxury properties and fund a lifestyle far beyond the reach of a public servant's salary. Each transaction was a brick in the wall that would eventually enclose him in a prison cell. The arrest finally came, and it was a moment of deep national reflection. Seeing a former minister in the custody of the EFCC was a stark reminder of the rot within the system. Mamman was held and interrogated, his high-status friends suddenly nowhere to be found. The charges brought against him included conspiracy, money laundering, and the diversion of over 22 billion naira. This was not just a trial of a man, but a trial of the entire political culture. As the news broke, the Nigerian public reacted with a mix of anger and weary cynicism. For decades, billions had been poured into the power sector with almost no tangible results. The grid collapsed frequently, businesses shuttered due to high fuel costs, and families lived in darkness. The Mamman case became the face of this systemic failure. People wanted more than just an arrest, they wanted accountability and a signal that the era of impunity was finally coming to an end. In the Federal High Court in Abuja, the atmosphere was electric. Lawyers in their traditional wigs and gowns argued over the details of counts that spanned several years. The prosecution presented witnesses who described how funds were moved and how official processes were bypassed. Mamman sat in the dock, a shadow of the powerful minister he once was. The legal proceedings were long and arduous, with numerous adjournments and technical maneuvers designed to delay the inevitable hand of justice. One by one, the 12 counts against him were read out. Each count carried the weight of years of imprisonment. The judge, known for a no-nonsense approach, listened as the EFCC presented evidence of how the Zungeru project's mobilization funds were systematically looted. The defense tried to argue that the procedures followed were standard, but the paper trail said otherwise. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming, painting a picture of calculated greed at the highest levels of the ministry. The fraud wasn't a solo act. It involved a network of collaborators who facilitated the movement of cash and the signing of fraudulent documents. This was a sophisticated operation that exploited the loopholes in the Nigerian procurement system. By bringing these collaborators to light, the trial exposed how deep the roots of corruption had grown. It showed that the minister was the head of a predatory structure that viewed public funds as a private inheritance rather than a sacred trust. While the legal battle raged in Abuja, the consequences of the fraud were felt in every corner of the country. In Lagos, small business owners struggled to keep their generators running. In rural villages, children studied by the flickering light of kerosene lamps. The billions that Mamman and his associates allegedly took could have modernized the transmission lines and built the substations needed to light up the nation. The human cost of this crime was immeasurable, affecting millions of lives daily. The Zungeru and Mambilla sites remained as haunting monuments to failed promises. Rusting equipment and abandoned foundations sat in the Nigerian sun, symbols of what should have been. These projects were critical for Nigeria's industrialization, yet they became synonymous with graft. Every day the projects were delayed meant another day of economic stagnation. The prosecution emphasized that this wasn't just a financial crime, it was an act of economic sabotage against the people of Nigeria and their future prosperity. The defense team fought hard, challenging the admissibility of the EFCC's evidence and claiming political persecution. They argued that Mamman was a victim of a system he didn't create. However, the prosecution remained steadfast, bringing in bank officials who testified to the authenticity of the transactions. The trial became a test of the Nigerian judiciary's independence. Could it hold a powerful former minister accountable, or would the case join the long list of high-profile trials that simply faded away? Public interest remained high throughout the proceedings. Every court date was covered by major news outlets, and social media was ablaze with commentary. Nigerians were tired of seeing politicians walk free after looting the treasury. The case of Saleh Mamman became a litmus test for the government's commitment to justice. The pressure on the court was immense, but the presiding judge remained focused on the law, meticulously reviewing thousands of pages of documents before reaching a final decision. The judgment day finally arrived, a day that would make history in the annals of Nigerian law. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with journalists, activists, and family members waiting in hushed silence. The judge spent hours reading the verdict, meticulously addressing each of the 12 counts. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the reality of the situation began to sink in. For Saleh Mamman, the man who once commanded thousands, the moment of reckoning had finally come to pass. Guilty. On count after count, the judge found that the prosecution had proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence of money laundering and criminal diversion of funds was undeniable. The judge noted that the minister had betrayed the trust of the president and the entire nation. His actions had directly contributed to the energy crisis that continued to plague Nigeria. The verdict was a resounding victory for the EFCC and a dark day for the political elite who thought themselves untouchable. Then came the sentence that shocked the nation, 75 years in prison. The judge broke it down, 6 years for each of several counts, to be served consecutively. This was one of the harshest sentences ever handed down to a former minister in Nigeria's history. It was a clear message that the judiciary would no longer tolerate the looting of public funds. The 75-year term was symbolic as much as it was literal, representing a lifetime loss to the consequences of corruption. As the sentencing of Saleh Mamman is a landmark moment, but it also raises questions about the others who haven't been caught. Corruption in the power sector is an old story, and many believe Mamman was just one player in a much larger game. However, this conviction proves that with enough evidence and judicial courage, the cycle of impunity can be broken. It serves as a stern warning to current and future ministers that their actions are being watched and recorded. The EFCC has hailed the judgment as a milestone in the fight against financial crimes. It validates years of hard work by investigators and prosecutors who often face immense pressure to drop high-profile cases. This victory gives the Commission more leverage to go after other big fish. The goal is to create a culture where public service is seen as a duty, not an opportunity for enrichment. For now, the Mamman case stands as a shining example of what is possible. But what of the Mambilla and Zungeru projects? The government has vowed to complete them, but the path remains difficult. The diverted funds must be recovered, and new leadership must ensure that every naira is spent transparently. Nigeria's industrial future depends on these projects. The story of Saleh Mamman is a reminder that corruption doesn't just steal money, it steals time and progress. The nation must now look forward, ensuring that the shadows of the past do not dim the hopes of tomorrow. Saleh Mamman's 75-year sentence serves as a grim milestone in Nigeria's long struggle against corruption. It sends a chilling message to those currently in power that the law may be slow, but its reach is long and its grip is firm. As the sun sets on his career, the people of Nigeria are left wondering when the light he promised will finally arrive. For now, justice provides a flicker of hope in the dark, reminding us that no one is truly above the law.